Hi, it's Leela, the proud Poly Kinky Queer Slut. Today's question is, what is age-appropriate sex education? So as a mother, this really mattered to me a lot. And so I'm just going to tell you what I did. And I didn't just pick this out of thin air. I went to a seminar when my son was a baby, and I did a lot of research, and I just kind of learned what's healthy for kids to know, because preventing childhood sexual abuse was very important to me, and protecting my kids to the best of my ability, and also giving them the tools to protect themselves and to feel empowered in their own bodies. So the first thing, let's talk about what age appropriate sex education is like for kids under 4. So little kids, tiny kids. So the first thing is teaching them proper names for their body parts: vulva, penis, scrotum, vagina, urethra. Like, kids at that age are really concerned about, like, they're learning all of these things, and when they ask what those parts are called, or when you're doing potty training, or when you're talking about how to properly clean yourself in bathtub, that's an excellent time to just casually use the correct terms, the scientifically correct terms. And that's because using terms like front or PP or those kinds of like euphemistic terms, they're confusing for children, but also they imply there's a shame about talking about those parts that doesn't apply to talking about other parts of your body. So when a kid is asking, is like touching parts and for names, and then touch their penis, if you say penis, then they just learn it's a penis. And it, like, this is my elbow, this is my hand, this is my penis. So that's not a big deal for them. The other thing that I learned in that seminar that was really useful was start talking to your kids about sex and sexuality while you're changing diapers. Not because they're going to remember, not because it's going to matter, and I don't mean like going into graphic detail about sex, but just saying, yeah, when a penis goes in a vagina, that's how babies are made. Saying those kinds of things to babies. They're not going to hear it. They're not going to remember, but you're going to get more comfortable saying it. You're going to get more comfortable talking about it. And one of the big things is that kids pick up your nervousness. So if you get more comfortable talking about it, then it makes it easier. And I can tell you, I practiced this, and it's still awkward talking to my 12 and 13-year-old about sex. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later when we get to this age that they're at. But yeah, so first thing is for little people, appropriate names for parts. The other thing that is very important, I think, is starting to teach bodily autonomy from an early age. And what that means is asking consent before you do things. So, for example, this isn't perfect. It's a practice, obviously. But like, for example, asking your kid, would you like a hug, before you just hug them. But also, it's less important in that like very intimate parent-child relationship when that child is young. Where they're really like, they've just been a part of you, and now there's this other part of you that has just been eating off your body, and now you're having to work with all the potty training stuff, and like there's a lot of messy intimacies with taking care of children. So aside from that stuff, like when other people want to physically impose themselves on your child, it's healthy to block that and to impose rules for the adults about asking for consent. And the reason why we do that is that, and children should always be able to say no. They should always be able to say no. And the reason for that is it makes your children resistant to grooming from people who are child predators. It gives your child a sense that their body is theirs to do with what they want, and it is not anyone's prerogative to touch them in any way that is uncomfortable for them. That's another thing you can do with your kids at this age, is just talk to them about how no one should touch their body in ways that make them feel uncomfortable. No one should touch their body in ways that make them feel weird or awkward or that they don't want. And that if somebody does try to touch their body in a way that they don't want, that they should talk to you about that. And so that might come up in ways like Auntie just tried to pick me up when I didn't want to be picked up. And that's how it's mostly going to present itself. And then you can have that conversation with Auntie. But it also creates a situation where if somebody does try to hurt your child, they're going to feel empowered to come tell you about it as no big deal. And that helps prevent the trauma and allow you to interrupt and stop and make sure that nothing bad happens to your kids. Because most child predators groom kids. before they actually assault them. They try to get the kids used to their touch. And that's easier for them to do if that child has been taught that they must submit their bodies to physical touch. Also, what I've noticed as my kids have gotten older is that my kids have a real sense of self-assurance in their bodies, a lot more than I did at that age. And I think that's because they've always had the opportunity to decline physical activities or interactions that they don't want. So once your child gets to be preschool age and elementary school age, so get books. So this is the book that I used, and it was really good. There might be a better one now because, this was like, gosh, got this when my son was 3, so it was like a decade ago now. But I'm just going to show you the table of contents of this book and a couple of the pages because it's really, really good. So first I'm going to show you there's this cartoon in here that is awesome, that is about how babies are made, that I just absolutely love. And it's, where are you? Or is it in the other one? There's a cartoon about the zygote that is really, really hilarious. But, okay, we'll come back to that. But, all right, so here's the table of contents. So just reading you a few of these things. The table of contents is like birds and the bees go to the zoo, so many questions, girls do this, boys do that, same and different, toe to head. And so as we go through these, so many eggs, so many sperm. So it's got these comics, like silly comics where you can just like literally read these silly stories to your kids. And in the process, you're saying things to them about sex education. So like that their questions are okay, that they can ask you whatever questions they want. About what boys do, what girls do, and that girls and boys don't have to necessarily do boy and girl things. Girls and boys can do all sorts of things. So a little bit of gender stereotype busting. How are our bodies the same and different? Like, how do we go to potty? Same and different. Based on what parts we have on our body. And then, just a simple diagram like of this is what my parts are called. This is what parts we have in common that are the same and different. And then on the other side, these are the parts that are the same and different. And again, not a big deal, not any kind of thing. Oh, and it even goes into the inside parts. What are the inside parts that are the same and different? How does my body work? And at this age, kids are learning about things like hearts and lungs. So it's just like not weird for them if they're also learning about testicles and ovaries. So that sets the groundwork when you like read your kids these stories. And then it talks about like different kinds of grown-up bodies. And then inside grown-up bodies and what that looks like. And then it goes into, it's not the stork, which is the page that says what sex is. And it's very matter of fact, again, kind of silly. And it talks about how often a man and a woman have a special kind of loving called making love, having sex, or sex. And it's literally just giving it to you. So it says, this kind of love happens when the woman and the man get so close to each other that the man's penis goes inside the woman's vagina. So very basic, straightforward language that is not weird. And then this is the cartoon I was talking about. So this cartoon, so for those of you who can't see the pictures, this is a book called It's Not the Stork. And it's by Bobby H. Harris. And so I encourage you to look it up. But this one, it's like literally a comic strip about the sperm meeting the egg. So it just gives the factual information about what's going on. And then it goes through pregnancy, childbirth, the whole thing, and then has a chapter at the end, or talks about kissing and cuddling, and then, touch that is good touch and touch that is uncomfortable touch, okay touch and not okay touch, and what that's like. So the kids get that picture. And then when they get a little older, there's a book that's for kids 7 and up that goes into more detail about the birthing process, more detail about pregnancy and what happens in pregnancy, a little bit more detail about some of the hormonal changes in puberty, what happens to your body in puberty, and how your bodies are the same and different in puberty. because it's very empowering for kids to have this information ahead of time. And then they also have a book called It's Perfectly Normal, which is currently on my 12-year-old's bookshelf, that really goes into detail about puberty. But again, in the same kind of illustrated way. So having those books around, casually reading them to your kids as just a book that's in rotation makes it normal, and it makes it not a big issue. Something that surprised me is kids have childhood amnesia. So I went to great lengths when my kids were little to make sure we had conversations about these things in a way that wasn't shocking for them and that was informational and that didn't put a lot of emotional pressure on them, but where they could talk to me with the proper names of their parts. And then they went through childhood amnesia and forgot most of it. So just a reminder that you have to reteach your kids. Right around 3rd, 4th grade, you've got to have the conversations again and go through the things again. And then kids start doing a thing, a lot of kids, not all kids, start doing a thing in late elementary school and middle school where they start privacy seeking and really insulating themselves. And at that stage, it's very important to take their lead, I believe. So they're doing the sex ed in school. It is important to make sure that they understand about sexually transmitted diseases once they get to be 12 or 13 years old. It's very important they understand about birth control. I actually had my first conversation with my daughter about birth control when she was 4 years old, because she told me that when she grew up, she wanted to marry her friend who was a girl instead of her friend who was a boy because she didn't want to have babies. And she had understood that when a man and woman get married, they have babies. And when 2 women get married, they don't have babies. So we had a conversation where I was just like, you know what? There are a lot of different ways that people can do these things without having babies. You can take pills that stop you from having babies. And she's like, oh. And then of course we talked about that later as well. So as they get older, I find it's important to make sure they have access to resources, that they understand that they can ask you about these things without getting into trouble. And one thing I'm trying to do is facilitate having other adults that aren't mom that they can talk to when they have questions. And then, when we get those things coming home from school, like the talking to your parents about sex and relationships, I wouldn't say I take those seriously, but I actually do the homework. I say, oh yeah, we talk about this all the time, but here you go. And the thing is, we don't really talk about it all the time anymore. We talk about it occasionally when these things come up. Other things that I think are appropriate at this age, at middle school age for sex education are my son is 13 years old now. I don't know what he's doing with his body, but you can make certain assumptions that he's probably exploring his body and discovering his body. He's also very internet savvy. And most people that I know were exploring some level of pornography around this age. So I did the embarrassing thing, the thing that is hard to do, but as a mom, it's my job, where I was like, okay, I'm going to say something to you that is going to be embarrassing, but I'm going to say it anyway. And I did this before bedtime, where I'm like, just so that you know, what you see in pornography does not represent what real life sex is like. And if you want real information, you actually have to Google and read sites that talk about it, like health sites and Planned Parenthood sites and things like that. But just so that you know that what you see and what shows up in pornography is not real. And I didn't say you're watching pornography or anything like that. I just said, I want to make sure you understand that's not real life. And he says to me, I understand. Now we can never talk about that again, ever again in my life, right? And I'm like, yep, we never, ever have to talk about that ever again. But another thing that I've done with my kids, and I've done this with politics, like socio-economic lessons and political justice lessons as well. But at the point where they're procrastinating on bedtime or those moments that are kind of jokey resistance to the program, not actual resistance to the program, I would say things like, well, you know what? Instead of reading story, if you don't want to brush your teeth, then we could do the pop quiz about sexuality. Tell me, what are all what are all the male parts called? What are the female parts called? What are methods of birth control? And, the thing is that that does get a conversation going a little bit. That's usually a snarky kind of jokey conversation. But, when they want to talk about it, when they have questions, it has started real conversations. Like it started conversations like, oh, I couldn't believe what my friend thought in school and what my friend told me about where babies come from. And then we're in a just casual, normal conversation about these things. Obviously, like going into high school, kids, I became sexually active at about 15 years old. I was careful not to get pregnant, not to have kinds of sexual activities that would get me pregnant, but I was having orgasms with my boyfriend when I was 15 years old. My son's 13 now, but that's right around the corner. There are kids who end up pregnant at 13 years old. Hopefully not a lot of them, but there are kids who do that, who end up in that situation. So I think it's very important to just not make the assumption your kids aren't having sex. And that's why I moved the Cypher sex supplies into the bathroom with a little note about I didn't tell my kids I did it. I just put them in there as a no big deal thing with a little note to make sure that they knew that they're allowed to use whatever they want to use. And I made a joke about balloon animals on that, give them to your friends, whatever. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that kids, as they get into high school especially, are going to start having a sex life, and to give some thought to what that looks like. And I don't know what I'm going to do when my kids are dating. I'm going to play that by ear. But I do think it's going to be important that they know that sex is not wrong and bad and sexuality is normal. And while we're on the topic of sexuality being normal, something that I have learned about in the past few years in a big way, talking about this topic with adults and with other adults in the sex positive community, is that a lot of people experiment with masturbation a lot younger than I would have thought, being a person that was kind of a late bloomer with that. I didn't really experiment with masturbation until I started having sexual activity with other people. But a lot of people start experimenting with masturbation when they're, as young as 8. And not in a way that's intentionally getting off, but in a way that's just exploring their bodies, touching their bodies in ways that feel good. A whole lot of people are doing that by the time they're in the 6th or 7th grade. So just making sure to vocalize with your kids what masturbation is and that masturbation's okay, and that touching your body in any way you want is absolutely fine. Dismantling that shame. I think that's very important. That's about all I know about age-appropriate sex education for kids, except to say that what age-appropriate sex education is not is having your kids around while you're having sex or having sexual engagements with other people. That, in my mind, is too far, and not only too far, but harmful to your kids. And kids should not be sexualized. They should not be turned into sexual objects. They should not be told that their appearance needs to be for the sake of other people. They should not be told that they need to dress a way or act a certain way in order to have a husband when they grow up, or have a wife when they grow up, or that, you're going to have lots of sexy boyfriends if you keep dressing like that. Things like that directed at kids are harmful, in my opinion. I think that is not sex education. That is sexualization of children, which I oppose. A child's sexual development should come from their self internally and be driven by their exploration of their body, by their desires, by their exploration with their peer group, by their engagement with peers, friends, and their own body. No adult should be directly involved in the sexual development of a child, and no child should be involved in the sex life of an adult. Hands down. And I do think that becomes especially important if your kids are in nudist spaces, where you're being absolutely careful to make sure that you're not sex shaming your children, and you're not over sexually exposing your children to your sexuality. I do think it's okay to be open about having sexuality. I think it's good to model, yes, I am an adult and I am going out on a date. And if your kid asks, say, yes, I will be having sex on this date. But saying, yes, I'm an adult who will be having sex, and having your kids have to witness you making out with your partner and then moving to the bedroom and instigating the activities, I think those are two different things. And to me, that's where I draw the line. I think that's about it. Talk to your kids. Get comfortable talking to your kids, and it's gonna get awkward. And when it does, guess what? Live in the awkward. That it helps. So thank you very much. I am Leela, the proud Poly Kinky Queer Slut. You can ask me anything. My email address is kinkyqueerslut@gmail.com. Thanks very much and have a great day.